Fasano. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Madam President. See what happens. Good evening, Madam President. Madam President, as we've heard from almost everybody in this circle, we all agree on one thing, that we need to make a change in the state of Connecticut. I think universally that is agreed to. The question is, what is that change? What is that course and conduct? What are the structural changes that we need to move us in a different direction? And I've heard some people in the circle say the best thing about the deal that's in front of us is a $1.5 billion savings over the 2 years, and some have argued, how could you turn that down? How could you say no to that when it's a savings? And I'm so puzzled, because for at least 6 or 8 weeks, we have shown a way to get $1.9 billion in 2 years of savings. We have shown that you can accept the wage concession, do some other insurance items, furlough days for non-union employees, and then make other statutory changes that take effect in 2022 after the SEBAC agreement ends and save this money. So I'm shocked when I hear people say there is no avenue. There is. Now, for those who then saw that, they turned and they said, aha, you're walking into litigation. I heard the word fear come across this chamber. Fear? People look to us for leadership. People look to us for strength, and we're afraid to take an issue and go forward with it? Fear will eat you up alive and spit you out. We're here not because we're afraid, and if we're going to make a change, we're going to be bold. Fear should not be an obstacle. And let's look at that fear. The only thing that Attorney General's opinion said was this: if there is an existing contract the government has, it cannot use its legislative authority to interfere or impair that existing contract. Somebody please identify in the Senate Republican budget what contract we interfered with, because I don't know of any. And I reread it again. There are no contracts we interfere for. Therefore, that lawsuit doesn't exist. Others have thrown up Roland, that case in which cost the state millions of dollars. Those who threw that case up haven't read it, don't understand it, haven't spent the time that it takes to appreciate the argument that they advance. Roland's case stood for one proposition: you cannot make a unilateral change against union state workers. Concept I agree with. Our proposal doesn't interfere with any contracts and affects non-union and union in the exact same regard. So you can't use the Roland case and say that somehow that's an impediment. You can't use the Attorney General's opinion and say we violate the Attorney General's opinion, because it's simply not so. It may fit with the narrative. I appreciate that. But it's not so. Others have said, how could you turn down a deal that saves $24 billion over 20 years? Well, the Senate Republican caucus paid $5,000 to OPM so we can have an actuarial study done of our union savings and pensions and health care. And we save $7 billion more than the governor's plan over the same period of time. That's what we save. That's what we save. So when we look at what we did, there is not an argument other than I don't like it, which I can appreciate. That's your discretion as legislators. But don't say it's because of Roland, and don't say it's because it's illegal, and don't blame it on the AG's opinion, because none of that is accurate. I've heard some arguments to say that the deal in front of us gives us flexibility. I've heard folks say that the layoff provision does not tie our hands. Then I have to ask one simple question. Why did the governor change his budget? Why did the governor say he was going to close 2 prisons, and when he realized that he would violate the 4-year no layoff clause, he only closed 1 prison? Why did he have to take out the technical high school system where he had a reduction of expenses? Why did he have to change the Southbury Training School Fire Department? And the answer is because there is not that flexibility with the 4-year no layoff deal. You don't have that flexibility, even if you have the retirements. So you don't have the flexibility. You have tied the hands of this legislature and future legislatures, as well as whoever the next governor may be. That's a truth. We saw it in 2011, 4-year no layoff. 2013, Governor Malloy says, I cannot do anything except cut expenses to municipalities, social services, because I have tied the hands of us being able to make consolidations in government. You just simply cannot do it. I've heard some folks around this circle talk about the fact that there's a $5 billion deficit and $1.5 billion is 30% of that savings. And again, I ask, we have a $1.9 billion. What is wrong with our budget? I have heard people saying that move retirees to the Medicare Advantage plan. That's going to save. That's a good idea. Well, that's what our budget does. We do that. I've heard people say that COLAs for Tier 1 and Tier 2 bother them. Well, our budget says after 2022, I agree, and we remove the COLAs. In fact, what we've done is made a little bit more fair. We say that until 80% of our pension is funded, COLAs are out, but once you're at 80%, they're tied to inflation. You do that by statute. So we have addressed that issue. I've heard some folks say about structural changes. So let's talk a little bit about structural changes. First, there's an issue about state of Connecticut arbitration statutes and the ability to pay. I've heard that discussed. We, unlike municipalities, are not subject to mandatory or binding arbitration. If we reject a contract and they go to arbitration, they could come back and we could say no. That's our ability, which brings me to another point. There are folks in this building saying it is bad faith if we reject the contract. What? We are the legislature. It was approved by or negotiated and accepted by the executive branch. Those are 2 separate branches of government. In our own statute, we say we get to vote on it. Does that mean we only get to vote yes? Is that the only way you could possibly vote? Because if you vote no, it's bad faith. And if it's bad faith, why do we let the union employees vote on it? They would have to vote yes, because if they vote no, we'd say, hey, that's bad faith. That's a crazy concept. It doesn't even pass the laugh test. And the fact that it's tossed around this building just shows the desperate status it is to make this deal go through. Because it's not founded in logic or law. It's made up. So let's look at some of the proposals we're talking about, the ability to pay. It doesn't matter. It's what we think the ability is to pay. It's what we say as legislators. We dictate policy. We get to say that's not right. We get to say 10 years from now it's not going to be good for us. Doesn't matter what the arbitrator says. We stick it on the municipalities. We're good with that. But for us, we're not subject to that. We say that after the expiration of the SEBAC agreement in 2027, no COLAs for pensions are to be negotiated in the SEBAC. Well, that's what we said in our budget. Chalk another one up for our budget. We said that. After the expiration of 2027, overtime should not be included in the pension. Chalk another one up for the Republican Senate budget. That's what we've done. Teachers Retirement System Viability Commission to ensure sustainability of TRB. If we study that thing one more time, we've got 100 studies out there. Everybody knows what the issue is. There's a report that's sitting on my desk that's a year old, that's got to be 40 pages, that talks about exactly what the debt is, what it is in the future, how it's going to hurt the state. We don't need to look at that anymore. We have it. Pension Legacy Debt Commission Management Plan. Not exactly sure what all that means, but we had Boston College, the governor's office, study the pension system. They did a full study. The Pew Foundation, a month ago, came out with a study of the pension system. You know what the Pew Foundation said? We're one of only 4 states that has the pension in collective bargaining. Correction, how do you fix it? You don't need to study it. How do you fix it? You take it out of collective bargaining, like Rhode Island, and like the other 46 states. And oh, by the way, if that is destroying collective bargaining, then 46 states have destroyed collective bargaining. I don't believe that's a definition. That's in our budget as well. Vote on all union contracts in our budget. Establish a cap on state Connecticut bonding in our budget. After the expiration in 2027, no SEBAC agreement can be longer than 4 years in our budget. Voting for the SEBAC agreement to extend another 5 years, so it's 10 years, violates the very principle that's put out there to say they don't like. The very principle. Create a mechanism to review certification of 2017 SEBAC agreement. I think that's called OFA. In 2011, OFA came out and said, you are not going to achieve the $1 billion savings that we have in there. And all of us in this circle, on the Republican side and in the House, stood up and said, OFA says you're not going to achieve the savings. That passed on party line because it was, you don't know what you're talking about, OFA, we got that. So what mechanism do you want to put in? The only mechanism that works is your conscience. The only mechanism that works is looking at the numbers. The only mechanism that works is not someone telling you it's wrong, but in your mind saying this is not the right thing to do for the state of Connecticut. The volatility cap on capital gains by Senator Fonfara, I think that's a great idea. It's not in our budget. Be happy to add it. Create an expenditure cap based upon census revenue. Depending on definitions, I think that's a great idea. Should be in our budget. But I'll tell you some other things that we should be talking about. The cap on state spending. We said we should have a cap on bonding at $2 billion. Make transportation a priority. Look, the high-level budgets that we're seeing around, these big talking point budgets, strip transportation. Strips transportation. Takes the money out of the STF and makes it go broke. We can't do that. We didn't make that a priority. Prevailing wage, something we've all talked to our towns about. Budget transparency. Let people know by May 5th annually what we're doing with the budget, at least on the municipal side. Require that when we have a number of deficits in a row, that we come in as a legislature, don't leave it up to the governor. Take the bull by the horns and do the right thing. And we should be able to do that. And we should require the state comptroller to analyze budget projections. We need to designate an investment advisory council that shall establish the assumed rate of return on our pensions so we don't end up in these problems where a deficit gets larger and larger and larger. Create an office of overtime accountability so we can watch our overtime. We just saw in the article, right, a week ago, or maybe it was over the weekend, I've forgotten, $250,000 of overtime. We need to act a 90-day turnaround time requirement for environmental reviews by DEEP. School construction efficiency plan. We should have 3 or 4 different schools that you pick from. And if you want to build a Taj Mahal, it's on you, municipality. This is the school you get. You want to go larger, you do it on your own. You could save money just by getting all the architectural and engineering done at once and then let the towns deal with it from there. and Medicaid oversight, requiring that all waivers for Medicaid services be approved by committees, and add result-first accountability to all of our agencies. These are real changes that we can do that are in our budget. But let me tell you what happens. We do have our budget out there. I heard someone say in this circle, we need to have bipartisan conversations. That bothers me a lot. I have given my budget to anybody who's asked for it. I have sent letters that I've never sent to the press, to the leaders. I have made phone calls, emails, and texts, I guess is the way I say it, to legislators in this building on the leadership side. And to this day, I have not had a meaningful conversation about a budget negotiation. They've come and they've asked questions, and I've had Lisa Hammersley in the room to give them any answers that we have. Every number we have in our budget has a backup. Every number has a backup. And I've given them that backup. But I can't negotiate with someone who won't negotiate. You want to come and pick our brain? We'll give you anything you want. There's legislators in this circle who have called me up and asked me for A or B or C on both sides of the aisle, and without question, I've given that information. Why? Because I think the best thing we could do with the state of Connecticut is get a bipartisan budget. I honestly believe that. But if you pass this deal, if you take better than a third of this budget and pull it off to the side, you have trapped yourself in an economic condition which has to result in three things. Has to. The math says it. Has to. You have to raise the sales tax or the income tax. Number one. You have to. You have to cut municipal aid. You have to. And you have to cut social services. Now, it's a combination thereof. But those are all in play, and those must be in play. That's it. That's the reason why I am suggesting a no vote doesn't do anything. A no vote holds the deal to the side. As I mentioned, this deal by the governor saves $1.5 billion. $200 million is related to SEBAC and SEBAC only. $200 million. That's a sneeze compared to $5 billion. So forget about $200 million. You vote no. Everything that these contracts do, you could do in a budget. You could take the entire deal that most of the folks on the other side of the aisle are going to vote for and put all those into a budget 2 weeks from now after voting no on this deal. There's no difference. But once you vote this deal out, you are trapped. You are done. You're only left with that side of the ledger, those three items. That's what makes this such an important vote. You have cut off your options to balance the budget by taking better than a third of the budget and saying, we're not going to touch this anymore. That's what you've done. I'd just like to take a moment and say, you have to learn from history. You have to learn from mistakes. Back in 2011, if you all can recall, there was a deal put together which was 11 years on the SEBAC deal. And the union negotiator said, now we have an 11-year agreement. I wish it was still 20, referring to John Rowland. But 11 years is still unheard of in the country. There's no one else with 11-year pension and health care deal. You all, because he was talking to his members, you all, if you ratify this, have the security that no other state worker in the country has, and I venture to say no other private sector has that security. The agreement you're reviewing has a 4-year job security. Sound familiar? Sound familiar? 4-year job security. Nowhere else in the country could you find a 4-year job security. Nowhere else in the country you'll find workers who know they won't be laid off for 4 years no matter what happens. So when you pick up the paper, like we all did yesterday morning, this is going back to 2011, and say, oh my God, job growth is down 54,000 in the entire country. They're talking about double dip recession. I wonder if I'm going to lose my job next month or next year. You guys don't have to say that. Sound familiar? Sound familiar? Giving up raises this year and next year, there won't be any raises. But then, back then it was 3 years of raises. 3 years of raises, that is a win. I'm paraphrasing, but that is a win. Finally, if this deal gets voted down, there will be chaos. Sound familiar? I'll tell you that. There will not be a budget. It will take something like 12,000 or 15,000 layoffs to balance the budget. Sound familiar? We did this in 11. It's the same dance. And here we are in 2017, and we're doing it again. So I ask you, is Connecticut better now than it was in 2011? I don't think so. There is another way. I will guarantee that if this gets denied today, I will guarantee there is a bipartisan agreement. Further, I'll guarantee that bipartisan agreement will have most of the union negotiations in it. I will also guarantee that I believe that those union negotiations will be helpful to union employees who are being paid $30,000, $40,000, and $50,000. They will receive a better benefit under a deal that we can put together ourselves. That is what's going to happen. Maybe not so much of those making 120, 130, but the 30, 40, 50, 60,000, that will happen because there is a pathway. But if we approve this, we're going to have a budget deficit come June 2018, and here are your choices. Taxes again, cuts to municipalities again, and social services, because everything else is rock solid. Closing, I'd like to say this. It would have been really easy for the Republican caucus to sit back and do nothing. Never really do a budget, which we changed 5 times. 1, because the numbers have changed. 2, because Governor Malloy criticized our budget, and we made changes to reflect that. 3, because some constituents came up and raised concerns, and we corrected that. 4, because we found some money after the actuary came in and gave us $84 million more than what we thought. It would have been so much easier for us to do none of those things. Put out a budget, say we have a budget, and let the other side of the aisle go ahead and force their way through on this deal and sit back and point figures. Politically, one can make a very strong argument that that is the manner in which you proceed politically. This is not about politics. This is about saving this state. I feel very strongly about this. This is about saving this state. We saw our income in our state 6 years ago go from $600 million to currently, for the top 100 taxpayers, actually top 15, to $247 million. That's $800 million over 2 years. We all could use that money for our social services, for helping out people in the union, for all sorts, for helping out municipalities. It's gone. I don't know if we get that back, but we do get it back with the bipartisan budget. So it would be easy for us to sit back and say, it's yours. You have the majority with the lieutenant governor. Go ahead, and we're not going to do anything. But that is not the right thing to do for the state of Connecticut. That's why we've been pushing so hard. That's why we've been an open book, because it is important to do this thing collectively as a group. And it's not about corporations versus unions or any of that. It's about doing the right thing for social service, right thing for the municipality, right thing to move the state forward. A bubbling economy floats all the things we care about on both sides of the aisle. So politically, we should have stayed back, but that isn't what we wanted to do. We made a conscious effort as a caucus that we are going to come out and present our case and be an open book and take the criticism for budgets where we did have to cut some things and listen to people get mad at us. We recognized that was a risk, but it was worth it, because we wanted a budget out there so that people can look at it and say they're not floating ideas, they have a line by line. And you could disagree with the line by line, then let's have a conversation. So, Madam President, I believe, I can understand the way the vote's going to go today. I understand that. I believe we've closed off an avenue that's going to come back and bite many of us. Those who vote for this cannot cower when a budget comes forward on that side of the aisle that has tax increases. Those who vote for this cannot cower when the municipalities have been cut. Those who vote for this cannot cower when social services have been cut, because your vote today is no different than a vote on a budget. And if you think you could split that vote and say, I voted for the SEBAC deal, but on this budget, I'm going to stand firm, that's gone. Understand what you're doing when you vote today. Understand the path that you're going down. Madam President, I'll be voting no.